Attention teachers and students, recess is off today due to crows. That's all. The kids let out a collective groan, but that wasn't what caught my ear. Did the principal just say crows, like the birds? I wondered to myself while telling my third graders we'd be playing Heads Up 7 Up instead. As they got ready for the game, I picked up the phone and called a buddy of mine who taught in the next room. Lisa had been helping me get the hang of things at Jefferson Moore Elementary ever since I started here at the beginning of the year, and I could practically hear her grin when she answered. Mrs. Townsend's class. Crows? I jumped right in. Did I hear that correctly? Yep, you sure did. The school has a code for crows, and trust me, you should stick to it. I paused, trying to think of a good comeback, but before I could, she said my name like she thought the call had dropped. I mean, are crows different in Ohio? We had crows in Vermont too, but we didn't shut down the playground because of them. She went quiet for a bit, and in the background, I could hear what sounded like a pretty heated argument over a game of Heads Up 7 Up. I guess great minds think alike. Crows are a bit of a different deal here. I can't really go into it right now. Meet me for drinks after school and I'll fill you in. Don't worry though, crow days usually just last a couple of days. A couple of days, I echoed in disbelief. But then one of her students started crying, and Lisa said she had to go. She hung up, leaving me with more questions than answers. It wasn't too much of a hassle, I figured. My kids, even though they were only 8 and 9, were a pretty well-behaved bunch. Hardly any fights, just the usual minor dramas that come with kids that age. And most of them were good pals who looked out for one another. My own game of Heads Up 7 Up was more full of giggles than disagreements, and when recess ended, we rolled right into math before lunchtime. Even with good kids, it was still going to be a long day without recess. The best-behaved kids can get antsy when they can't run around outside. Fortunately, we had gym today, so they could burn off some energy in the enclosed gym building. As we lined up and walked across the school, heading for the gym, I couldn't help but glance over at the playground as we passed by. Even as a grown-up, I couldn't help but think the new playground was pretty awesome. They had replaced all the old metal stuff with bright, colorful plastic, and it made me wish I could ditch my tie and sensible shoes and just play for a while. There were 5 big, vibrant structures, teeter-totters, tons of slides, a 4-square court, some of those springy animal rides, a large sandbox, a basketball court, and plenty of shady spots to sit and chat with friends. It was an incredibly inviting place, but today it looked like it had stepped straight out of a Stephen King novel. The crows had taken over every inch of the playground, covering the area like a black carpet. They watched us as we walked by, looking offended that we dared get so close. I got it now. It was more than a little unsettling to see that many crows all in one place. They call a group of crows a murder, and now I understood why. They looked like they were capable of anything, just sitting there glaring at us. Even I felt uneasy, like they could actually do some damage, and it took a real effort to turn my back on them. When the bell rang to release the students for the day, the crows were still there, and I noticed that nobody went anywhere near the playground as they made their way home or to the buses. As I was heading to my car, Kayla shot me a text saying she had to go home with a stomach bug, but she promised we'd meet up soon so she could fill me in on the whole crow situation. Just don't do anything stupid in the meantime. I don't want you getting in over your head. I rolled my eyes at her message but figured I'd play it safe until I knew more. I had to admit, something about that mass of crows had really rattled me, and the idea of going out there to scare them off didn't sit well. I wasn't sure how they'd react, and I wasn't in a rush to find out. I had joked about the crows back home, but I wasn't sure I had ever seen anything quite like this. I must have been thinking about those crows as I drifted off to sleep, because that night they followed me into my dreams. In the dream, I was walking onto the playground, the crows sitting all around, watching me with disapproving eyes. Everything beyond the playground was shrouded in mist, like I was standing in the middle of a fog bank. And the further I walked into the playground, the more crows there were. In the center of the playground was an old metal merry-go-round, the kind that used to injure kids who dared to play on it. Standing right in the middle was a man, slowly turning with the motion of the ride. His back was to me, and I noticed he was dressed in a coal black coat with a high dark collar. His top hat was lined with feathers and shiny trinkets, and his boots were black and heavy. He spun slowly, the rusty contraption creaking with each turn. The crows were all fixated on him, their beady eyes glued to his every move. And as he rotated, I felt a sudden fear. I didn't want this man to look at me. Something told me that if he did, something terrible would happen, but I was powerless to look away. He just kept spinning like a ballerina in a music box. And as he came around, and I caught a glimpse of one glittering eye before I woke up drenched in cold sweat. The next morning, the school announcements included another warning about the crows, but it felt unnecessary. We had all seen them perched on the playground equipment as we arrived the day. I was working the pickup line that morning, and it wasn't the kids' reactions that stood out to me. The kids were disappointed but seemed to accept it. No, what really caught my attention was how the adults reacted when they saw the crows. Some of us, like me, who were new to the area, just found it odd. But the local parents? They looked at that playground like it held some deep, buried trauma. Many of them made sure to tell their kids not to go anywhere near the playground, no matter what. "Keep a close watch on her," one mother said to me as her kindergartner walked inside, her bright pink coat standing out among the sea of kids. I was hoping they wouldn't come back this year. "Damn him," she muttered under her breath, then shot me a glance like she had said too much before hurrying off in a controlled rush. We settled into the day's lessons, but you could feel that the energy was off. They didn't have gym to look forward to today, just music, and they knew there would be no real outside time. I felt bad for them, and when I called Lisa around 10:30, after my text went unanswered, I got hit with another surprise. The woman who picked up said that Ms. Townsend was out today and might be out for the rest of the week. Poor thing caught that bug that's going around. I hope she didn't leave it behind when she was here yesterday. I hear it's nasty. So, no lunch with my friend to break up the day, and I braced myself for what was shaping up to be a long one. During indoor recess, as the kids played hide and seek, I noticed one of my students was still at her desk. Jessica was coloring like her life depended on it, swirling her crayon over the paper with intense focus. She seemed completely uninterested in the other kids and their games. It was unusual to see that kind of concentration in a kid her age, and she jumped a little when I came up behind her and tapped her shoulder. "What are you?" I began, but the words caught in my throat when I saw what she had drawn. She had recreated the playground from my dream perfectly, right down to the man in the dark cloak and top hat. He was standing on the merry-go-round, arms raised to the sky, with crows circling all around him. The picture was far too detailed for someone her age, way too good for a kid who wasn't even in middle school yet. When she looked up at me, she asked if I had seen him. "Who?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The crow count," she replied, as if it was something everyone should know. "I haven't," I lied, picking up the picture for a closer look. "Who is he?" "Mommy says not to talk about him," Jessica said, suddenly looking guilty, like she realized she shouldn't have been drawing him either. "I won't tell," I assured her, placing the picture back on her desk. "Is he a friend of yours?" "No," Jessica said quickly, and I could hear the fear in her voice at the thought that someone might think he was her friend. "The crow count isn't anyone's friend. He's the one who brings the crows here. At least that's what Mommy told me. She said I must never go into a big group of crows, or the crow count will take me away with the murder." Hearing such unsettling words come from someone so young sent a chill down my spine, but I just patted her arm and told her that was very interesting. It seemed like the most normal thing in the world to her, and I didn't want to draw attention to the fact that this was my first time hearing about it. I left her to her coloring, letting the students know they had about 5 more minutes of indoor recess before we had to get back to our work. As I returned to my desk, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling, so I decided to do a little digging. I Googled crow count and crows in Ohio, but I didn't come up with much. Searching for crows in Ohio mostly led to memes, because of course it did, but crow count only brought up a single entry. It was an old Germanic legend about a ruler of crows who sometimes took children to feed his flock or young girls to be his bride. None of them were ever seen again, but the tale was used to warn children to stay away from large groups of crows, often associated with battlefields and death. The depiction from that legend was all too familiar. A courtly figure in a tall hat adorned with feathers, draped in a dark cloak. I quickly clicked away, feeling my stomach twist into knots, and tried to focus on geography. But the thought stayed with me, even as the day came to an end and the bell rang to signal everyone to head home. The playground was still overrun with crows, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I could see someone standing among them. Was that the hatted gentleman? The crow count? I didn't dare look too closely, but I was starting to get frustrated. 2 days without outdoor recess was wearing on my students, and I couldn't imagine what we'd do if this went on much longer. Still, it seemed like we might not have to find out. After another night filled with dreams of crows and the man in the tall hat, I arrived at school to find a group of adults gathered around the edges of the playground. The crows eyed them with obvious displeasure, like bouncers about to kick them out, and I walked over to see what was going on. The teachers looked at me with a mix of guilt and uncertainty until Mr. Simonson, the 5th grade English teacher, stepped forward and explained what had happened. Samantha Parks was walking along the track, heading to her first class, when she just stopped and stared at the playground. It was like she was in a trance, and then she slowly walked off the track and straight into the playground. "Has anyone gone in after her?" I asked, alarmed at the thought that the birds might harm her. The others shook their heads, and I felt a surge of anger as I dropped my bag and marched toward the playground. Crows or no crows, I wasn't about to let a student get hurt without doing something. But just as I was about to step in, Mr. Simonson grabbed my arm. "He won't like it if you disturb him," he whispered, shame etched in his voice as he said it. "Who?" I asked, straightening my shoulders and giving him a hard stare. "The crow count?" He looked startled that I knew the name, but when he let go of my arm, I walked straight onto the playground, leaving that pack of cowards behind. The crows watched me, their beady eyes full of hostility, but none of them made a move as I walked among them. It was exactly like my dream. The crows had taken over everything, their numbers swelling over the 3 days they had been here. Their murder was massive, the playground equipment buried under a living, breathing carpet of feathers and beady black eyes. I waded through that sea of wings, feeling their gaze on me the whole way. Before I knew it, I was at the center. There he stood on a battered merry-go-round, the paint faded and chipped, looking like it had been pulled through time. He stood in the middle of it, turning slowly as if he had all the time in the world. The crows guarded him, leaning closer as if ready to strike if I made a wrong move. But he seemed completely at ease. He wore that same black hat, rimmed with feathers, the same dark cloak as black as a raven's wing, and those leather boots that looked like they had walked through centuries to be here. He seemed like he could have known Vlad the Impaler, could have watched Shakespeare perform in person, could have wielded a knife on the Ides of March. He was ageless, as much a part of history as the merry-go-round he stood on. And as he turned, I noticed the girl kneeling on the hot asphalt. She was tall for her age, almost more woman than child. And as I took a step toward her, the man spoke. "Do not touch what belongs to the crows." I stopped in my tracks despite myself, and when I looked up, I finally saw his face. He appeared young, with perfectly peppered hair and sharp, angular features. He looked like a figure from a painting in some ancient museum, a man out of time. As he completed his slow turn, he resembled nothing less than a demon in human form. But it was his eyes that held me. They sparkled like the facets of a gem, the kind of eyes the crows would covet above all else. I couldn't help but wonder if they would claim them when his life finally came to an end. Somehow, even though I was entranced by this strange man, I found the strength to speak. "She doesn't belong to you. She's a student here, under the school's protection, under my protection." The man sneered, his lips curling in disdain. "You dare to tell me what I may or may not claim? This is my domain, and I take what I desire." "Not today," I said, my voice steady. The girl seemed to break free from whatever spell had held her, and she began to hyperventilate. Where am I?" she stammered, panic rising in her voice, and I did my best to soothe her. That's when the crows finally made their move. They came at us like a dark wave, wings beating the air around us, claws raking at our skin. You'd think a crow isn't much to be scared of, but when they're swarming you like that, it's a different story. There were so many of them, that all I could do was pick a direction and run. As long as it was away from the crow count, I didn't care where it led. I pushed the girl ahead of me, shielding her with my body, and got pretty torn up in the process. She screamed as I covered her, using my arm to protect my eyes. We ran blindly, crashing into things and stumbling back before pushing forward again. It felt like we'd never escape, that the crows would either bury us under their numbers or carry us off. I thought I'd never see my class, my students, or anything else ever again. And that was when we finally broke free from the cloud and out of the playground. I collapsed on the ground, still covering myself, but the crows were gone. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath, reaching out for the girl to make sure she was okay, but she wasn't there. I looked around frantically, trying to find her, but she had vanished. Where did she go? Had she managed to escape? What happened? But before I could piece it together, I heard the rustling of wings and the angry cries of the murder. I looked up just in time to see them take off all at once, a massive wave of black wings blotting out the sky. In the midst of that dark cloud, held aloft by countless crows, were two figures, one wearing a tall hat and cloak, and the other in the uniform of our students. I watched helplessly as they were lifted higher and higher, disappearing into the massive crows until they were gone. Tears filled my eyes as the murder soared into the sky, leaving the playground behind. The other teachers rushed over, helping me to my feet and guiding me to the office. The principal was waiting for me, and she gestured for me to sit down as the nurse came in to tend to my cuts and scratches. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," she said, her voice heavy with sympathy. "It's why we don't often hire outsiders. They don't understand, and it usually ends badly for them." I had 1,000 questions, but shock had stolen my voice. "The crow count is part of this town's history," she continued. "He's always been here, and he always will be. He comes, he takes, and then he leaves. When he doesn't take, we celebrate. When he does, we mourn. That's why we have the crow warnings, why we teach our kids to be cautious, and why the parents are so fearful. We know he will take if given the chance, and there's nothing we can do to stop him. The crow count is old and cunning, and nothing will deter him. It's best to accept it. He never takes more than we can afford." As I left the office, I saw parents consoling each other, and I wondered if they truly believed that this was a price they could afford to pay. Now I'm sitting in my apartment, deep into a bottle of something strong. I don't know if I can keep teaching here, knowing the crow count will be back. But then again, I don't know what else I'd do. I love this job, and I care about these kids. If I can keep them safe, don't I owe it to them to stay? And beyond that, I need answers. I want to know more about this creature, why it's here, how it came to be. But most of all, I want to know why it takes them, and what it does with them once it has them. And more than anything, I want to find a way to stop this, to prevent the crows from taking what's most precious to us ever again.